So a topic as it relates to school safety and just really safety in general is crisis communication. And when I say crisis communication, it's not necessarily, the public relations and some of the outbound messaging, but it's really the internal crisis communication when it relates to the actual emergency. So things like panic alarms, walkie-talkies or radios, notification apps or direct emergency alert type apps, even in classroom or in building phones. The discussion really is starting to become around what types of communications should we have, and better yet, should there be layers of communications or redundancies or backups, or where should certain communications come from? And so one of the things to begin to think about and address when it relates to these types of things is, first and foremost, how is our emergency going to be reported? And so thinking about either active shooter or other security type crisis or security type emergencies, how are we going to pass the information on that there's an emergency? Even within that, there's some layers. So let's say you're an employee or in a school teacher. What are the means in which to report that versus someone who may be a visitor or a business that's open for public for sale? Open for public customers and people just to walk in, retail stores. How are these types of emergencies being reported? And so the couple of layers we should be thinking about is panic alarms, and just like you'd have like a fire alarm on the wall, these type of panic alarms, and they could be addressed lockdown or emergency or police, and there's a number of vendors that provide these types of panic buttons, but they can be used by anybody. They can be used by a school teacher, a student, a visitor, someone visiting from the public, or other employees. All they have to do is see the button, see the emergency, and press it to start the flow of information, that crisis communication starting. For employees or again, thinking about schools and school teachers, an app-based response. So we see a lot of communications that are related into cell phones. So they have an application that provides alert or two-way messaging. All these things are really good. But also don't forget that the phone can still be used to also call 911. So when we think about redundancies, the button on the wall is great, but what if you can't get to that button, or it's, you've had to lock down or hide or secure yourself in a storage room or in a classroom that maybe doesn't have that? Having the application on the phone in order to hit a panic button or a panic alert to send information first and foremost to the property that you're at or the campus that you're on, and then relaying that information to law enforcement, using 911. So those are a couple ways to think about it. But then even expanding further out, how do other people get this information? We had a panic button or maybe an emergency alert button, and where does it go or what does it do? Does it send out an alarm or a siren? Is that different than, let's say, a fire alarm? Is it different tone or a different type of alarm than we may have for other types of emergencies? And also, if I'm not working there or if I don't have the app, how do I know exactly what the emergency is or where it is? So the thought process is starting to become, PA systems or overhead public address systems is a way to do it. But also two-way instant communication. So the use of, handheld radios, walkie-talkies. And this technology has come far, far and advanced as far as range and capability. So many of the more technologically advanced systems will have a alert or panic button on the actual device. Many of them will connect to Wi-Fi networks or have other means to connect outside of just a generic radio frequency. Coverage usually is far superior than what it used to be. We used to hear about dead spots on large campuses or on multi-story buildings. So a lot of technology has come a long way, and everything all the way up to hands-free radio communication. The same type of technology that we see in our phones and in our homes to use automation and just simply talking to a device. We're also now seeing in handheld or walkie-talkie or radio type devices, so that way your hands don't actually even have to be in use to call for help or to set off a panic alarm. And so as we think about upgrading different types of emergency communications, and again, it's from the alerting process, alerting someone that somebody's there or there's a medical emergency or an active shooter, to notifying other people. Most of the breakdown that we're starting to see as organizations are upgrading various components of their emergency systems is this tends to be forgotten. They may say, hey, we have an emergency communication app, it alerts everybody as two-way communications and that's satisfactory. It's a step for sure, But we also need to think about the multiple ways that emergency can be reported, thinking about panic alarms or some other type of reporting device that anybody can use without having to be an employee or have an app or having to be logged into an app for that to work. The other layers within apps is the security and privacy permissions as well. One of the things that I see quite a bit in a variety of organizations that have these type of applications is that they may be downloaded to a phone, but after 2 or 3 updates, or maybe after the user has changed out or changed their phone for a new one, or something has happened, they forget to log back into the app, or it's something they don't use very often, or maybe not using often enough. And they find themselves logged out. Or for security permissions, they get logged out every 30 days, 45 days. And so a lot of times these apps end up not necessarily in the technology that's erring, but sometimes in the user error of the technology, or not using it all the time. Some of these apps are built in to where it's a routine of the day. So there's a variety of different things that have to be done within the app, maybe daily or weekly, that keeps the user logged in, and that requires the permissions for push notifications, alerts, using their location or their GPS coordinates. So there's a lot of layers depending on the type of application that's being used. But we see also a lot of failure points within there. And so while these applications are absolutely a component of the emergency communications and oftentimes just the routine of daily work life, we also want to think about the additional ways to communicate. And even if you have I would say almost a old school, so to speak, phone in a classroom that's a direct dial through to the office, it's still better than nothing. But we want to think about how can we dial out. So we've seen time and again, especially in school shootings, with direct line of communications, picking up a phone that rings into the office. Well, if the crisis or the emergency is in the office, then no one may be picking up that phone. And now we're right back to the use of cell phones, which again, reporting apps, calling 911 from a cell phone is great, but also requires signal. Did the phone connect to Wi-Fi that morning? Does your carrier have decent signal or range in the area in order to connect, to make a phone call or to connect to the app? And better yet, calling 911, where does that 911 call go from your cell phone? And so in certain regions, it may go to state police, it could go to the county sheriff, it could go to local law enforcement. And so again, there's layers of which, it's going to be different for every business or every school. But as we're upgrading things like cameras and door locks, and we're looking at policy and procedure and software, don't forget in the communications realm, there's just as many layers and just as many things that we should be doing to connect people to the emergency, notifying what's going on, and even after the entire thing's over, the recovery, the reunification, the communication, if it's a school, to parents, where to go to pick up their child. And it could be, everything from a natural disaster to, the water being turned off for the day because of a water main break, and having to shut down the school and have kids reunified, maybe not necessarily on campus or in a different order or different fashion than how they would normally go home. So even as we think about the reporting at the beginning, the communication during two-way communication, overhead systems, app systems, text-based systems, but also the recovery. How do we continue those crisis communications via software or via hardware afterwards to conclude the event, to conclude the emergency, and get back to normal life? So again, it's a part of the emergency planning process, it's a part of the security process, but working through not only the limitations, but also the abilities of any sort of equipment or software you have is vitally important.